It was the spring of 2021, and the world was still reeling from the chaos of the pandemic. Lockdowns had become the norm, and the once bustling streets of cities were now eerily quiet. For me, the isolation was suffocating. My name is Alex, and I've always been an avid hiker and camper. The mountains were my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the noise of life and find solace in nature. But this time, I wasn't just running to the wilderness for peace. I was running from something far more sinister. A year earlier, I had been a rising star in the tech industry, working for a startup that promised to revolutionize renewable energy. The company had been my life for 3 years, and I had poured everything into it. Late nights, weekends, even holidays. But a single mistake, a miscalculation in the algorithm I designed, caused the company to lose millions. Investors were furious, and my reputation was destroyed overnight. The backlash was relentless. I received countless threats, some vague, others chillingly specific. I changed my phone number, moved to a new apartment, and eventually quit my job, hoping the storm would pass. But it didn't. The harassment followed me, a constant reminder of my failure. By the time the pandemic hit, I was a shell of my former self. The lockdowns gave me an excuse to disappear, to leave the city and lose myself in the wilderness. I spent months traveling to different national parks, camping in remote areas where no one could find me. One of those places was Whispering Pines National Forest, a sprawling expanse of dense woods and rugged terrain in the Pacific Northwest. I arrived at the park on a crisp April morning. The air was thick with the scent of pine, and the forest floor was blanketed in a thin layer of frost. The parking lot was empty, a rare sight even during the pandemic. I grabbed my backpack, locked my truck, and started the hike to my chosen campsite, a secluded spot near a small creek deep in the woods. The trail was quiet, the only sounds being the crunch of snow beneath my boots and the occasional chirp of a bird. It was peaceful, exactly what I needed. After about 2 hours of hiking, I reached the creek. The water was crystal clear, flowing gently over smooth stones. I found a flat area a few yards from the water and began setting up camp. The tent went up easily, and I gathered some dry wood to start a fire. As the flames crackled to life, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in months. I cooked a simple meal of canned beans and sausages, then settled by the fire with a book. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the forest. I rolled a joint and took a few hits, letting the weed ease my lingering anxiety. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. But that peace was short-lived. As the last light of day faded, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I frowned. I hadn't had service for hours, and apart from my family, no one had my new number. I pulled out my phone and saw a series of texts from an unknown number. "How's the camping going, Alex? Beautiful spot you found. I can see why you chose it." My heart skipped a beat. The texts were from a 503 area code, Portland, Oregon. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Who could this be? And how did they know where I was? The weed had already taken effect, and my paranoia was in overdrive. I stood up, scanning the darkening woods around me. The forest was silent, save for the crackling of the fire. I grabbed my handgun from my backpack, a Glock 19 I bought after the threat started. I rarely carried it, but tonight I was grateful for its weight in my hand. I usually put out the fire before bed, but the thought of being in total darkness was too much. I left it burning and crawled into the tent, my gun resting beside me. The texts kept coming. "Doesn't matter who I am. You should be more careful, Alex." I replied, my fingers trembling. "How do you know where I am?" No response. The silence was deafening. I tried to distract myself with a murder documentary on YouTube, but every rustle of leaves outside made me jump. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the snow. They were slow, deliberate, moving closer to the tent. My grip tightened on the gun as the footsteps stopped just outside. There was a flash of light, like someone taking a photo. My phone buzzed again. It was a picture of my tent, taken from just a few feet away. The next text read, "Sweet dreams, Alex." I snapped. Adrenaline surged through me, and I unzipped the tent, firing 2 shots in the air. The sound echoed through the forest, and I heard footsteps running away. I screamed into the darkness, "Stay the hell away from me!" before crawling back into the tent, my heart pounding. The rest of the night was a blur. I didn't sleep, too wired from the adrenaline and fear. Every sound outside made me jump, and I kept the gun close, my finger resting on the trigger. When dawn finally broke, I packed up my camp as quickly as I could and hiked back to my truck. The forest, once a place of peace, now felt like a prison. I drove home in silence, my mind racing. Who had followed me? How had they found me? The questions haunted me for weeks, but the text stopped. Whoever it was, they had gotten the message. I hadn't been back to Whispering Pines since, and I didn't plan to. That night had changed something in me, a reminder that even in the wilderness, I wasn't truly alone. Years before the incident at Whispering Pines, I had another experience that still gives me chills. It was the summer of 2015, and I was on a camping trip with my best friend, Mark. We had been planning the trip for months, eager to escape the city and spend a week in the wilderness. Our destination was an old cabin deep in the woods, a place Mark's family had owned for generations. The cabin was rustic with no electricity or running water, but it was perfect. We spent the first few days hiking, fishing, and enjoying the solitude. But on the third night, something happened that I'll never forget. We were sitting by the fire, sharing stories and laughing, when we heard a noise in the woods. It was a low, guttural growl, unlike anything I'd ever heard. We grabbed our flashlights and scanned the trees, but saw nothing. The growl came again, closer this time, and we retreated to the cabin, locking the door behind us. The growling continued throughout the night, growing louder and more intense. At one point, something slammed against the cabin wall, shaking the entire structure. We huddled inside, too scared to move. When dawn finally broke, the noises stopped. We packed up and left the cabin, vowing never to return. To this day, I don't know what was out there that night. Mark and I never talked about it again, but the memory still haunts me. The wilderness is a beautiful place, but it's also full of mysteries, and sometimes those mysteries are best left unsolved. The final story I'll share happened just last year. I was on a solo camping trip in the Sierra Nevada mountains, a place I'd been to many times before. I set up camp in a familiar spot, a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. The first night was uneventful, but on the second night, something strange happened. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of voices. At first, I thought it was other campers, but the voices were too close, almost like they were right outside my tent. I unzipped the tent and peered out, but saw nothing. The voices continued, whispering in a language I didn't understand. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, but the moment I did, the voices stopped. The forest was silent, and my campsite was gone. The tent, the fire, even the trees, everything had vanished. I was standing in an open field, the moon casting an eerie glow over the landscape. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually I woke up back in my tent. The sun was rising, and everything was exactly as I'd left it. I packed up and left the mountains that day, and I haven't been back since. I still can't explain what happened, but I know one thing for sure. The wilderness holds secrets that are better left undisturbed. These experiences have left me with a deep respect for the wilderness. It's a place of beauty and wonder, but also of danger and mystery. I've learned that no matter how far you run, you can't escape your past or the unknown. The mountains may offer solace, but they also demand caution. And sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones lurking in the shadows, but the ones we carry with us.